Don't know why.
All right, we are recording. Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It is whatever time it is for you, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning. I think we've got 7 of you online right now, so that's awesome. This morning, we've got an interesting exercise to kind of dig into here. This is, the exercise today is part A of the money tree. So the last 2 days, you've been immersed in your money memoir, which is your money story and predominantly a lot of your developmental programming. So how you internalized and interpreted information and the programming that has now led you to, or that's in your brain that's really kind of behind or driving a lot of the decisions that you're making with respect to your money. So it's interesting because when I work with clients one-on-one and we get to this point, I don't know how many of you are feeling this right now. Oftentimes for clients, there can be a little bit of anger and resentment coming up now because they're seeing their story and they're like, damn it, mom, why did you do this? Or damn it, dad, why did you do this, right? Like, you know, all of this garbage that you've now, put on to me, and now I'm taking this and putting this on to my kids. So there's a couple things there. I just want to watch that you're aware of that was your choice to internalize it the way that you did, right? There was a couple options in terms of how that could have been perceived, and you took it to mean one thing, and that's totally cool because we're getting rid of that. The other thing now is that anger and resentment you have, and this is part of the reason why I love this exercise. The exercise we're moving into, the money tree, is about understanding their relationship with money and what they came into. And my goal for you in this is that the objective here is to actually start to see not only the inherited patterns, so what were you born with, right? Like what programming and beliefs around money were you born with? But ultimately here, when people finish this exercise, they find a whole new sense of compassion and love for their parents. Because you actually see for the first time for many of you that they really were doing the best they could. They just got the programming they did. And especially back in those days, there were no therapists, there were no counselors to start having, conversations around, what divorce meant for them and what it felt like when, mom left or dad left. And there wasn't the help that we have now. So they've taken all of that information and that formed their program. And then they were never able to release it. So as parents, they just taught you what they knew, and they were doing the best job that they could with the tools that they had. So the objective today is twofold, is one, to understand the inherited programming, but two, hopefully, that you find some softness or your anger or resentment starts to soften with respect to the programming that you receive from a developmental level because you're starting to see them in a whole new light. So what we're doing today is the money tree. It's basically, your, what they call a genogram. And there's some great experts in this area. One is a gentleman by the name of Mark Wallin. I've talked about him before. His book is called It Didn't Start With You. If you go through this process and you're fascinated by it, you'll love Mark's book. And Mark does a lot of work specifically in the area too of what's called a break in the bond with the mom. And I'm going to talk about that here in a bit. So how you're going to work through this exercise today, and I think all of you have printed out your manual. I think you had to do that because it's in PDF form. So that's perfect. If you are trying to do this exercise, please don't try to do it in a Word doc or in PDF. It's going to be very painful for you, very challenging. So print it out and just using pen or pencil, just start putting the people who represent these spaces into the blocks here. So up here, this is your space to start listing not only your current relationship with your partner, but were there any other significant relationships in your life that you need to put here? You're going to be listing your kids and potentially their kids if you want. I wouldn't get too entrenched in your grandkids right now, just because we're looking to dig into the roots, but you might start to see some patterns going up the other way. So up here, these are kind of the branches and the leaves of the tree. This is your relationships, your significant relationships, your relationships with kids. If there are any stories of miscarriages or adoptions or abortions, please write them down. This is yours. You don't have to share it, but write it down because I suspect very strongly that you're going to start to see patterns emerge here. And you'll notice in Mark's work, he talks about that oftentimes the people who are not talked about, that are hidden out of shame or whatever it may be, oftentimes tend to carry the most weight. So he'll talk about abortions, he'll talk about miscarriages, he'll talk about suicides, right? Because it's a lot of that hasn't been processed properly. So a lot of it's heavily immersed into the cellular development area because there's been very little conversation about it. Talking about it heals it. So if there isn't conversation, it just starts to pack on. So once you've done that, and again, hopefully you can detach from this first part of the exercise, because I just want you to write people down and start, okay, there's that person, because I'm quite positive you'll start to see patterns again. This is you. Then we've got your mother's side. We've got your father's side. We've got your mother's mother. We've got your mother's father. You can see how this goes. And then if there are any siblings, like if you have brothers and sisters, just kind of write them here in the middle. If you have aunts and uncles, you can write them beside here. They do actually play a role, because you will be surprised, again, just like your brothers and sisters, if you have any, a lot of our programming is the same. We just react to it differently. So if you start to list your aunts and uncles, and then what was going through, what traumas did they experience? Again, this is where your patterns start to emerge, right? So it's these little things that once you start digging in, you can find some very interesting data there. So that's the first part of the exercise. So you're gonna list everybody. The second part of the exercise now is to go through this list of questions. Now, again, this is Mark Wallin, and this is his list of questions. But it's interesting when you start to kind of go through this, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that story, and I forgot about that story. So go through the list of questions. Again, he does talk about, you know, who died in childbirth. Were there any suicides? It's interesting when he starts talking about Holocaust and genocide. It's interesting to see people's language that have had that in their family tree, because there's definitely things that start to emerge. So just go through the questions and see what comes up for you. So these pieces here, these questions are what we call the kind of the emotional piece of it, right? The emotional trauma of the situation and of the family. And you will see that when we get into the next part of the exercise, I ask of you to start writing down what those traumas were. So, you know, maybe on your mother's side with her mother, maybe there was several abortions, or maybe there were some adoptions, or maybe the family overall on your mother's side, they moved to Canada and they were given farmland that, you know, was not very good, and they just couldn't grow a crop and they lost everything. It's interesting when you start to put this down, you'll start to again see the patterns here. I just want to expand this because I'm just curious to see what example this is my example. And it's interesting because on my maternal side, and you'll see this especially as we start talking about the break in the bond and the detachment from the mother because of that whole in utero piece. So hopefully you've watched that video on mindset, because this plays in here, and I'm going to talk about a bonus round here. But if any of you are feeling that your environment isn't safe, that you don't have a safe and secure environment, whether it's savings, whether it's the investing piece, right? We're making subconscious decisions We keep ourselves in that unsafe environment because cellularly, that's what we know. A lot of that can be in the break in the bond. So this was one of my examples because I absolutely had a break in the bond with my mother in utero. But when I look back on her story, you can see here that, and it wasn't overly talked about, this was just, I recalled two small, short conversations that my mother had with me about my grandmother, her mother, trying to actually abort her 3 times before giving birth to her. Right? So from it, you can imagine, if you think about that from a cellular level, what that does to a fetus, right? Now it's interesting because on my father's side, his parents, they were together, but he was not a planned birth. He was not a planned child, and they actually left the city of Toronto and had him in Montreal and lied about his birth date out of shame and secrecy. So here, these two people, these two little babies that weren't necessarily wanted in the world in the first place, they find each other. And guess what? They have me, and I wasn't planned. And I was not expected, right? So it's crazy. When you do this, this stuff is going to show up for you. I promise. It's a matter of how deep you dig. So, so before I get into this is so fascinating. When I start talking about the physical piece, you're going to laugh. But before I get into that, I just want to show you there is a bonus round, and it is called the break in the bond, and it's in the exercise room. I don't add this to the workbook because this is very, all of it is personal. It's not going to be relative to all of you, but I want you to know it's here if you're feeling like you want to go through this. So the break in the bond is really about the in utero experience, or those early months or years after you've been born. And it's specifically as it relates to the mom and not necessarily the dad. So if you are feeling like your environment isn't safe, I'd like you to do this bonus round and work through these questions, because you might come up with some aha moments here, right? So this is about your environment in utero, what was going on with your mom, what was happening with the relationships, were there any stillbirths or miscarriages before you? So everything in utero, and then right afterwards, like, was there postpartum depression? Was there anything that kind of, you know, forced you to separate somehow? A sister-in-law of mine she had twins, and it's interesting because as soon as she gave birth to the twins, the daughter had to go into NICU, and the son, the boy, was fine and got to stay with the mom. You'll see now that I can see that with the daughter, that early break in the bond, she resists the mom, right? And she's only 6, and it's like, I'm independent, I don't need you, I'm fine, I've got this, stay away. And it's interesting because the family will look at that as, oh, she's so strong and independent. And I'm seeing it as the break in the bond and the rejection of the get away. I've got this. I don't need you. You weren't there, right? It's interesting. So this is the bonus round if you want to go through it. Okay. So now that you've gone through that, this is a heavy day for you guys. Sorry. Maybe I should be splitting this one up. But I will say the first 4 days of this week, they all kind of blend together. And you'll find that as you go through this exercise, it may actually feed some of your memories in your memoir. So just add them to your memoir if they're coming up, going, oh yeah, I remember that actually happened with me. So they all kind of feed together. All right, where am I? I just wanted to come back to page 2 here. Or sorry, the second part of the exercise. Oh, this cough is you're gonna laugh when I tell you about this. Okay, so this is interesting. And this maybe should have been the bonus round, but I find this fascinating. So this is all of the physical trauma that came up in your family. So in my family, there were actually a lot of situations or a lot of circumstances around mental health, of course, on both sides of the family, because that's what we attract, right? We attract partners that we get to learn from that are very similar to us. So what you are going to find, you're going to put together a whole list of all the stuff that has come up. So diabetes, MS, cancer, lost limbs, broken limbs, gestational issues, hair loss, eye loss, hearing loss. With cancers, write out the specific types of cancer, if unfortunately, if that's come up in your family. But the first part of this is just get it all down. Detach from it, write it all down, and then you're going to ask me, what the heck does this have to do with inherited programming? What this has to do, how many of you are familiar with Louise Hay? Anyone? I don't know why I ask these questions. It's hard for everybody to respond, but Louise Hay is one of the pioneers in mind-body connection. And now there are hundreds of experts in this space, and especially now with epigenetics, they know that this is true. They know that this proves itself to be true. So basically, what Louise Hay did is in the early 70s, she started to understand, she started to recognize, especially because she was heavily immersed in the work of AIDS and working with AIDS patients. She started to recognize that our thoughts, and specifically the negative and destructive thoughts and programming, if we don't deal with it, it starts to show up physically for us. So once you write all of this down, there is another bonus round in your in our equipment room called Causes and Symptoms. And this is Louise Hay's work. And so when you write down all of these things that happen, including alcoholism, right? You can go through this list. It's all alphabetized, and you can see how this might be showing up for them on an emotional level. So alcoholism, for example, feelings of futility, guilt, inadequacy, self-rejection. How do you think that shows up financially, right? Are these people making millions? Maybe they are, but I bet you they blow it after because they don't feel that they're worthy, right? And so it's interesting. Now here there's alcoholism. This is, well, you can see with addiction too. So I'm just curious the difference. Running from the self, fear, not knowing how to love the self, and then alcoholism, feelings of futility, guilt, inadequacy, self-rejection. So very similar. So it's fascinating when you go through this. You should go through this for yourself too, right? What is showing up for you? What's showing up for your partners? What's showing up for your kids? Because that right there is going to start to pinpoint the mental programming going on, right? The emotional programming. Now, why I laugh is because I was going through this to figure out, I wanted to give you one example. I have a client right now who is a money martyr, who is also going through breast cancer. When you look at it, it says a refusal to nourish the self, putting everyone else first, over mothering, over protection, overbearing attitudes, the martyr, right? Like it all just comes together. So if you're interested, Louise Hay book, of course, it's in our exercise room as well. What I didn't put down on this bonus round is that in her book, she offers you kind of, there are mantras, or there's ways, there's things that you can say to yourself to start reprogramming. So instead of that refusal to nourish, it's I'm important, I count, I now care for myself and nourish myself with love and joy. So she's got a couple ways that we can reframe there. I probably should add those to this document, but I will not get to that this week. So I'd encourage you to get the book for sure. To me, it's like a little Bible. So why I was chuckling is because as I was going through this, have you noticed my cough?
Yes.
This week?
Yes.
Guess what? Guess what the cough is? A desire to bark at the world. See me. Listen to me. There's no coincidence that I just got on Instagram this month. It's like, hello, I'm posting, hello. And I have this nagging cough. So anyways, my reframe is I am noticed and appreciated in the most positive ways, and I am loved. So I tell you, you'll laugh. You'll laugh when you'll go through it. You have to laugh because you're like, God damn it, right? Like it just goes up. It's hilarious. Again, I'm detached now a little bit more for this. So hopefully it's hilarious for you, but it'll definitely be an eye-opener for you. So that is it, my friends. Sorry, that is it. It's a big day for you, but it's a fascinating day. And I think I mentioned to all of you that I kept my money tree. Originally, I wanted to burn it because I'm like, it's time to let this go. Like, it's time for me to stop this, to heal this so that, you know, Sophie doesn't get it. And then I thought, you know what, I should keep it for her as a gift when she's 25, because you know what, all of our kids, we can do we can have the best intentions and try so hard, and we have no control over how they've internalized data. We all do it. We all have a brain, so we're all processing, and we don't know how they're processing the information. So I was actually just even telling her last night that she could have inherited some stuff, and she got silent. She's like, I'm actually thinking about that, right? She, you know, so I'd keep it if I were you, but totally up to you. There's one of the things we will talk about tomorrow is different ways, like what are we seeing through this, and ways that you can start to release it or heal it. And that's a very personal experience for everybody. So there isn't one magic, oh, we got to let that go. But I will go through some of the ways that have worked for myself, some of the ways that have worked for clients. And then there's tons of them in the bonus room or in the equipment room. So really got to work on this cough. All right. Any questions about today? So this is and I love this one. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's easier for people too, because you can detach from it. And I think, I know Heather, actually, she made a really good point yesterday or the day before. And what if your family isn't around? What if there's no one to talk to try to dig into these stories? One of the things that you can do is start to research the time frame or the year, and also start to research the geography. Like, where were they? What part of the world were they in? And start to look at stories of what people were experiencing at that time. When you start to go through the stories and read people's biographies, and not that you're going to dive into whole books on this, but as you start to look at the news circumstances around that time and, you know, what was happening, you might find that as you start to read, you will get emotionally triggered. And it's that emotional trigger that you need to write down, because something about that situation is embedded. So again, you know, that is one way. If everybody has passed away and you can't find that information, to start going back and looking again at the time frame and the geography. The other thing to do is to start looking at the patterns of siblings, and if it's not your mom and dad, your aunt and uncle, what were they doing? Because again, this pattern, we all do it, right? We're just reacting differently to it. So that's one way to find the nuggets as well. All right. Any questions? No questions. Okay. Well, you know where to find me. Make sure to carve yourself out some quiet time to do this. And again, make sure to show yourself some kindness and compassion afterwards, maybe a hot bath, go to bed early, drink some hot tea. I do not recommend alcohol for these exercises. It can trigger some stuff for you. So try to be present, try to be conscious, and work through it. All right, I'll leave it there. Have fun, enjoy. We'll see you tomorrow.
You. I won't be here tomorrow morning.
Okay. Thanks.
So I'll catch up with you on Friday.
Sounds like a plan.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.